So far as we know, my campaign has not been hacked into. Cybersecurity will be an issue that I will be absolutely focused on as president.
They know who the nature of the enemy is. So there's no magic to the phrase radical Islam. It's a political talking point. It's not a strategy.
We have to be so vigilant. We can't be led by weak, ineffective people. We can't. They're weak and they're ineffective.
Freedom is back in style. Welcome to the revolution.
We burning down the night, shooting bullets at the moon, baby. This is how we roll.
Sean Hannity. The new Sean Hannity Show. More behind-the-scenes information on breaking news and more bold, inspired solutions for America. Coming up next, our final news roundup and information overload hour.
So today, once again, as has been true too many times before, I held and hugged grieving family members and parents, and they asked, why does this keep happening? And they pleaded that we do more to stop the carnage. They don't care about the politics. Neither do I. Neither does Joe. And neither should any parent out here who's thinking about their kids being not in the wrong place, but in places where kids are supposed to be. This debate needs to change. It's outgrown the old political stalemates. The notion that the answer to this tragedy would be to make sure that more people in a nightclub are similarly armed to the killer defies common sense. Those who defend the easy accessibility of assault weapons should meet these families and explain why that makes sense. They should meet with the Newtown families, some of whom Joe saw yesterday, whose children would now be finishing 5th grade, on why it is that we think our liberty requires these repeated tragedies. That's not the meaning of liberty.
All right, that's the president, wrong as usual. You know, the sad thing about all of this, and actually I give credit, there are even some Republicans saying it, you want to know why we have the rise of ISIS? It's all related to how the war in Iraq was politicized. We had won the war. The surge was successful. We had taken Baghdad, Ramadi, Fallujah, Mosul, Tikrit. Anyway, the president had to pull out early because he politicized the war. By pulling out early, it created a vacuum. That vacuum was filled by ISIS in Iraq, and it was filled by ISIS in Syria because Syrian President Assad crossed the red line that Obama drew in the sand, used weapons of mass destruction against his own people, and in comes ISIS, in other words, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. There it is. So you cannot deny this. We are now in a war of civilizations, a war for our survival. The president fundamentally does not even want to acknowledge that this exists. Criminals do not care about gun-free zones. You know, for my own personal protection and behavior, I'd like a fair shot. I want somebody comes in and is going to shoot up a place, and I'm in there, and I've carried a weapon my entire adult life. I want a chance to maybe not only save my life, but other innocent people's lives. I've seen the funerals going on today. I've seen the families. You see the suffering. You see the misery, some of which can be prevented by gun-owning, law-abiding citizens. And on top of all, you know, you got to take this a step further here because this is really important. There's not another gun law that's going to stop a radical jihadist from carrying out their desire to kill innocent men, women, and children. It's just not going to happen. Now, we have new information today, by the way, that apparently this insane shooter was literally checking social media to check if he was trending. On top of that, we have now discovered that his wife seems to be was knowledgeable of him preparing to do this. It does raise a lot of legal questions in all this, the culpability question, and how do you prove it? Anyway, joining us for analysis on that is our friend Mercedes Cohen, legal analyst for the Fox News Channel, a senior partner at the firm Gordon Reese, and Danielle Mclaughlin is an attorney, constitutional expert. She wrote The Federalist Society, How Conservatives Took the Law Back from Liberals. Welcome back, both of you. Mercedes, the one thing I always say about you is if I'm in trouble and I need help in a court of law, there's nobody tougher than you. I bet if the woman, the wife of this killer, this terrorist, called you, I bet you'd have some strong arguments in her side how difficult it is to prove her culpability that she was an accomplice here.
I think well, thank you for those kind words, Sean. Great to be on with you.
By the way, not that you would want to do that. I'm just saying that I just know how your mind works is what I'm saying.
Well, if I'm called to defend her, I mean, you'd have to raise the obvious defense, which would be, number one, is that even these communications that she's admitted to, that, he bought ammunition, but there's nothing where she says definitively, he bought ammunition and he told me he was going to massacre people at the nightclub. So there has to be that link. Two, there's the fact that they've gone to several locations. There's never been a definitive statement by her where she says, my husband said definitively he was going to go and massacre all these people. And that's to her defense. Look, it is absolutely a horrible tragedy that happened. No one's going to condone this type of behavior. And frankly, what will ultimately happen to her is that she'll be scapegoated. No one that has any inkling that something like this horrific act will take place can remain silent. You simply can't remain silent. If you see something, say something. Even if it's a random conversation, a random issue that's been brought up, anything that you believe could manifest into this type of horror, you have to speak up. And frankly, that's going to be her biggest challenge. Is the prosecutors are going to be extraordinarily aggressive with her.
What would the threshold be? What would the threshold? Let's talk about the threshold, though, Mercedes, in terms of, all right, what would prove the wife had an obligation, legally speaking, to tip off authorities that her husband is plotting and planning and scheming this, and by virtue of the fact that she did know that she may have accompanied him to buy some of the weapons and ammunition, etc., does that maybe prove that she was an accomplice in some way?
Well, and that's what the prosecutors are going to say. They said, look, it's not like they're having this little conversation and they're cuddling at night in their home. She's actually doing some commission towards this type of crime. So what is she doing? She knows that he's going to buy the ammunition, the type of ammunition that he purchased. She knew that, in fact, there was an admission where she said to the authorities, I was afraid he might do something, although maybe not that particular night, because she claims that he was going to go to Pulse to meet friends. So there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of inconsistencies. But where does it draw the line, and you have to say something to authorities?
All right, but what about this? What about
going down? Okay.
At one point, they were texting during his shooting. I mean, this is mind blowing. He's checking if he's trending on social media. But at one point, while he was texting her during the attack, she says to him, knowing this is going on, that she loves him. And she tried to call her husband several times during the standoff, according to a second law enforcement official. Now, the timing of those calls seem relevant to me because of the reports that the attack had emerged, and after she realized her husband might be responsible, he didn't answer. So, we don't know at this point if she made any attempt to report her husband during any of this time.
Well, that's number one. And number two, I mean, I remember the text message, she begins with saying, where are you? But that's inconsistent with what she's already told authorities, because she had said he was going to go meet with friends. And there was definitely some inconsistency in what she's divulged. And frankly, she should have at some point, she has the marriage communications defense, privilege. She could assert that any time, and it survives a spousal's death. So any communication that she had, as long as she was married during the time of this communication that she had, and obviously this was her husband, that would have survived his death, and she could have attached it, and no one could force her to discuss these types of.
So in other words, you're pointing out what I suspect, and let's go to Danielle here, that it's going to be very hard to get the information and evidence to prove it.
Sean, I'd agree, and I agree with much of what Mercedes says. You know, what this will come down to is knowledge and intent. And there have been different media reports circulating as to what she did know, what she did accompany him on in terms of visits to Pulse and to Disney. But some of the things, even at HuffPost, she said that ring a little strange to me and surely would be a red flag. Number one, the public records search that show that in May he sold his home to his sister and brother-in-law for $10. She also says that the authorities, that she offered to take a lie detector test, and the authorities said no, which also seems rather strange to me. There are a number of crimes that she may be accused of, and as I said, it comes down to knowledge and intent. One is an accessory to the crime, and if they can prove knowledge and that she knew it was happening, she would be punished to the same extent as the gunman. And then the other thing that you're touching on, Sean, is misprison of felony, and that is when you conceal knowledge of a pending crime. And I suspect that authorities will be looking into whether she was texting with him at the time the crime was being committed, understood it was actually happening.
Well, let me go back, Danielle, to the admissibility issue that Mercedes was talking about in terms of communication between a husband and wife.
Right. Well, you're absolutely right, Mercedes. The marital privilege exists to protect communications between husbands and wives, so they can ask her about it, but she can assert that privilege. She can decide to cooperate with authorities if she thinks that would be better for her. So it's really up to her. She's the holder of the privilege, so she is the one that can release it. The other thing that comes to mind is this notion of lying to a federal agent, and that can sometimes be worse than any of the crimes that you may be accused of. And if the offence actually involves domestic or international terrorism, in addition to fines, you can get up to 8 years in prison just for telling falsehoods to federal agents.
Yeah, Mercedes, you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I mean, that's a big issue because if you may recall, Martha Stewart the charges against her were that she lied to the feds and that there were some issues regarding trading and insider trading. She wasn't found guilty of insider trading. That was tossed up, but what she found guilty was lying to feds. It is a very significant crime. It's one that is easily triggered. These types of inconsistencies that we see from the wife may ultimately turn around unless she has some sort of agreement, and I'm not even sure if she's lawyered up and she has a lawyer trying to negotiate an agreement with the feds that says she will cooperate, but only on the condition that she will be prosecuted for her cooperation in the event that there's something that triggers. But in those types of agreements, the federal prosecutors will say, no, if you lie to us, we're going to come after you, just as they did with Martha Stewart, just as they do with many others that have lied to the authorities. That's a separate crime in and of itself.
All right. Everything you're hearing about me is a lie. That's what she says. All right. Now, the Huffington Post has a pretty interesting piece about this today. And anyway, so virtually everything in the media about the wife says is a lie. They lie in situations like this. But don't the wives lie oftentimes? For example, sourcing, helping, that she helped facilitate this whole thing. The government, for example, is the government leaking information about her? Where's all this information about her all of a sudden coming in here? Are they trying to pressure her? What do you think's happening?
I think they're working with the federal government, and you know this as well, Danielle. I'm sure that you've worked with federal officials. Sure. They have tremendous resources. So they're talking to neighbors, they're talking to relatives, they're talking to her schools where she's attended schools. They have such a wide net, especially with this catastrophe that took place. It's going to be in a wider net, and they're extraordinarily aggressive. They're digging into this type of information, and leaks happen. Whether it comes may not come from the government. Usually they're really tight-lipped about in these situations, especially with an ongoing investigation. It may happen just these individuals that are participating in the wider net in this investigation that they're talking.
Yeah. Now, she claims and apparently spoke out in a text to the Huffington Post through a third source that, why aren't they going after the people that sold the guns and blaming them? She writes all of this. I'm not so sure. What if you can independently find the information from a husband to a wife? That's not admissible, Danielle, is it?
Well, if the information exists outside, then it is admissible. So what Mercedes is talking about are communications between a husband and wife. Once a third party is involved in those communications, then the privilege is broken. So if there is third-party knowledge of any of these communications, then the privilege no longer exists.
Well, that would get pretty interesting, wouldn't it? All right. So if you had to predict, does she get indicted, Mercedes?
She'll get indicted.
Will she be convicted?
It's going to be tough. I think there's going to be a huge public sentiment towards a conviction. She'd be the only person, and as Danielle said earlier, with the charges of accessory, she will face the same penalties as if she were the one pulling the trigger. So we're talking about 49 counts of murder and 53 counts of attempted murder. I think it would be extraordinarily difficult for a jury to say, no, she didn't do anything, especially when she participated in, at a minimum, buying the ammunition.
Danielle?
You know, without understanding all of the facts, I mean, if what we're seeing in the media is true, it doesn't look good for her. I'll be honest, and I agree with Mercedes. I come back to this knowledge and intent, and the only way that prosecutors are going to understand the contours of those is by having her in a room and talking to her and interrogating her. So, and if they find that she did have these things, again, the penalties will be really, really substantial.
Yeah. All right. Thank you both for being with us. Appreciate it.